All right, thanks for watching again today. My name is Eric Blattner, and I am joined by Kirby DeMoss, one of our co-founders, managing partner for Divvi Wealth Management. Kirby, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
You bet. We're going to have a pretty casual conversation today. Before we jump into the nuts and bolts, though, I just want to remind folks that if you enjoy the work we do, the best way to support us is to go over to divviwealth.com. That's DIVVI wealth.com. Click on the link in the header that says blog and sign up with your email address. And then you should receive an email from us, typically once a week, somewhere along those lines, with our thoughts and commentary around markets or financial planning topics, some of the ideas that Kirby's going to touch on today, that hopefully you find helpful. And we really take kind of an education first approach with that type of content, that type of a blog post. So hopefully you find that interesting. The second way is to go over to YouTube and search at Divvi Wealth Management and subscribe to our channel there, so you can be notified anytime we post a new video. So with that being said, Kirby, we're recording this mid-December 2023, and about 6 months ago, you made a post on the blog talking about ways that folks can maintain control of their lifestyles in the face of uncertainty. And that seemed topical at that point in time. There were a lot of companies, particularly in the tech space, but a little bit more broad-based, that were announcing layoffs. And we even had some, stories firsthand of clients and friends that were going through some of those transitional phases. It wasn't too long ago that a few of us went through those phases, so we had some pretty useful firsthand experiences to share. And then it continues to be topical. So here we are now, again, December, and just within the last week or so, we've continued to see more announcements. Like Hasbro is laying off about 1,100 employees, GM's cruise division, GM more broadly, Etsy announced some layoffs. So companies are continuing to pay very close attention to labor costs. And we've seen a number of companies kind of go through this cycle, cutting back on the number of employees. So with all that as a backdrop, we wanted to, put some voice to these thoughts that we wrote about 6 months ago. And in the article, you highlighted 5 different strategies that folks may want to consider as they, either enter one of these phases or if life happens, so to speak. So with that as kind of a backdrop, why don't you spend a little bit of time on, the first concept that you talked about, which is really about emergency savings.
Yeah, and I might even start just a little bit before there and give a little bit of background just to provide some additional context to the conversation. Eric, thanks for the introduction. But it was just less than 2 years ago, really, a little bit more than 2 years ago, when I had a corporate event at the company that I worked for, and there was essentially, a buyout scenario that ended up meaning a lot of folks lost their jobs. Ultimately, I was transitioned as part of that out of the organization and had an opportunity, obviously, to do something I love here today and help form Divvi alongside my partners. But there were a lot of moments of kind of self-doubt and concerns around what does this mean for my family? What does this mean for me personally? What does it mean for us financially? Some of those things I had done an okay job of. There are other pieces that I wish I would have been a little more thoughtful about, and so it was really important to me to write this blog post and to share this video with you all, because at some point in our careers, it's very likely that we are going to have this experience unless we're running our own business. Inevitably, corporate America goes through change. Every company goes through change, and gone are the days, or few are the days, or opportunities of folks working for the same company for 40 years and retiring and having that retirement party with the cake at the end. So thought it was really important that we wrote about this and wanted to cover a couple of those things. So I'll start with where you kind of hinted at there, Eric, which is this idea of emergency savings. When we work with clients, we always recommend they generally have anywhere from 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash available to them at all times, that's untouched, that's really there solely with the idea that if there was a rainy day, there was a job change, that you'd be able to support your day-to-day living for that time period. Generally speaking, the 3-month period is reserved to those folks that have dual income. The reason for that is obviously you're offsetting some of the risk of one person losing the income. You still have the other typically. The 6-month period would be more for single income families, or a family where maybe one of the providers is making significantly more than the other, and the family's more reliant on that income. So again, 3 to 6 months is a general guideline. If you're not there yet, it's definitely something you want to be working towards, and it's a good goal to achieve, and that it will give you a lot of peace of mind, particularly if you start to see some of the changes that are occurring at your company that might be cause of concern for you. It just will help you through some of those times. So Eric, I don't know if you'd add anything to that.
No, I think that's a great foundational starting point for a lot of folks. Is really, again, put a little bit of pencil to paper and figure out what those monthly expenses are. For a lot of folks, that's just a good exercise in general to help understand exactly where your money's going. Inevitably, you're going to find some expenses in there that you probably signed up for a few years ago that you don't even realize you're still paying for. And so that's a good exercise in and of itself. And then the other thing that I just reiterate, and I think you touched on this, but occasionally we talk to folks say, I've got this money over here, in some type of a fund, and they may feel like, okay, that money's over there, but if it's invested in the market in any way, shape, or form, that's not exactly what we're talking about here. Like, this is supposed to be very low risk, very high liquidity, very safe money that you can access at a moment's notice, in case life happens. And inevitably, when those rainy days come along, you want to make sure that money's there. So if it's invested in, even in a conservative fund with a little bit of equity exposure, like, sometimes things happen, and those investments probably felt safe. But if we go back and even look at 2007, 2008 timeframe, you never want your emergency savings account to experience a meaningful drawdown. So that's the only thing I would mention too, kind of in addition to what you talked about with the emergency savings.
Yeah, and I know in my case, having that emergency savings in cash allowed me to almost pay myself like I still had that income.
Yeah.
And was able to draw down on it to the extent that I needed to get through that time period. So again, I think really critical. That'd be, idea number one. The second idea is a little more creative perhaps, but just the idea of thinking about the things you're truly passionate about in your life, and whether or not some of those might be unique or interesting business ideas that could be potentially profitable. So we all love the work that we do on the daily basis, but there are usually things we're doing outside of work that we enjoy, as much or more. And, we've seen some really neat examples of some individuals where that kind of passion or whatever they were doing outside of their work hours that turned into a business ended up being fairly profitable. It's a great way to diversify your income stream. It's also a great way to give yourself a soft landing in the event that you have an event happen at work where you no longer have a position, as that might be an opportunity for you to go full time into that passion and turn it into your income, and decide that very well might be how you want to spend the rest of your career.
And there are certainly worse avenues to pursue than doing something that makes you happy. So if it has been a passion project for you, something that you run to in your spare time, the idea that you might actually be able to earn a living doing something like that, you kind of get your cake and get to eat it too. That's good advice. Okay, one of the other pieces you wrote about was staying visible, and I think this is one of those pieces that for a lot of people is easier said than done. It takes a little bit of nerve to occasionally to stay visible. But why don't you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, and I think it means a lot of different things to different people, and everybody has a different comfort level with the concept of networking and keeping your network current. But a couple of things I would point to. There are people I know and I have in my life that are what I would call master networkers, and that probably is never going to be me. These people have an elite skill set of being able to interact and connect people in a way that, I could probably read every book on networking, and I'm probably not going to get there. That being said, I don't think that's necessary in order to keep an active network going for yourself. I think there are a couple key things there. That require discipline. And so the idea being, number one, of course, there's all the things you can do through social networks today in order to stay engaged with your industry peers, whether it's through LinkedIn or other forms of social media. That's a great place to start. What often happens, I think, when we're in our jobs is even something like a LinkedIn becomes something we go back to once every 6 weeks, and it really should probably be something you're doing something on once a week or more. That doesn't take a lot of time. It's just adding it to your daily routine, but just so much as going in and liking a post here or there or joining an industry group on LinkedIn can make a big difference in terms of your visibility if and when you get to a point of where you might need to reach out to that network for help. Locally, I think it's important to stay in front of folks just, when you can, a lunch, a coffee, aim to have a meeting like that a couple times a month where you're getting outside of the walls of your organization and you're interacting with people maybe in the industry, maybe outside of your industry, and just talking about, what's going on in the marketplace. Those oftentimes end up being really great contacts of people that you can reach out to if and when you need to, that are going to know you, are going to better understand who you are as a person and as an employee, and give you some opportunities there. So there's just a couple things there that I would point to. But I think ultimately it's really difficult sometimes for people if you don't set disciplined time to dedicate to your network. It's not always the most natural. So really thinking through that and not having to, getting to that point where you need to engage with your network and you haven't been doing the work along the way.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I know, like, my personality, that's one of those pieces that's definitely easier said than done. But in my experience, and I think there's tons of research to kind of back up this idea that, there's nothing that brings, or there are few things that bring as much satisfaction to individuals in helping others. And so by being visible, by staying in contact with those folks that you do have some relationships with, honestly, that care about you, who knows what doors might come open just by engaging in regular conversation with folks that you know and care about. So I think it's definitely good advice. Let's move on to the fourth one. And the headline there is Know Your Options. What would you say about that?
Yeah, know your options literally. And so the idea here is it's pretty simple, which is for a lot of our corporate employee clients, they have a number of different ways that they're compensated from the organization. Oftentimes, that's structured in some form of stock options or other options to have ownership of the company for which they work. Those are great ways to build wealth, and obviously we support those concepts. It's a great way for the company also to create some incentive and align their employees with the outcome of the company. So not only do they usually put a vesting schedule on that suggests, hey, we'd like you to stick around a while to kind of earn your way through that. But you're being paid in the form of equity in the company. And so the idea is the better you do as an employee, that's going to impact the performance of the company. Ultimately, hopefully that impacts the performance of the stock, and everybody wins. So they're a great way to compensate folks. Probably one of the bigger concerns we have as it relates to that is just ensuring that as prudent investors, we're being really thoughtful about where our income comes from and where our investments lie. And so I think a good financial plan as it relates to your stock options would be to understand how much you're willing or wanting to have in that bucket, and committing yourself to that. And then it's just a matter of when you get overextended or when that bucket gets a little bit larger than what you want it to be as a percent of your overall net worth, being disciplined enough to go in there and trim that back and diversify some of that, I think is really critical. The big thing as it relates to risk and stock, obviously stocks can go up and down. Bad news comes out tomorrow, you could lose a significant portion of your net worth. We want to diversify away from that. But the biggest thing is really the fact that your income is tied to that company. And in the event that something bad happened to that company, they need to go through significant layoffs. Not only are you at risk of potentially losing your job, but then also that probably means that the stock might not be performing that well either if they're having to take some of those measures. And so I think the big thing here is understand your compensation program, understand the vesting schedules of your options, and be really thoughtful on the front end about how much exposure you want to your company stock and stick to it.
It's great advice. Again, we think about that human value component in financial planning, and a lot of times when your human value is very closely correlated to the financial assets that you have, in which case, your employment income and the source of your wealth are moving the same direction, it just can present an extra risk. And so I think it's great advice to at least be eyes wide open as you think about that and manage it in a way that makes sense for you. That's great advice. All right. And the last one, self-care is not selfish. What do you mean by that?
This one's pretty simple. I think, but to me, it was really critical when you're going through corporate change or you feel, the company's going through a bad spot. It can be pretty crippling to your productivity. Can be really difficult on yourself personally, and can I guess show itself in a lot of different ways in your daily life. I think the key here is, a lot of us are working from home still or have some form of work from home. When you're going through stressful situations like that from work, you don't always get the outlet of being able to interact, side by side or one-on-one with another employee. So make sure, you're taking care of yourself. Take some time out, get outside, get some fresh air. I'm guilty of not doing that enough, even today. And it can really change your outlook on the rest of your day. Interact with some of the folks that are in a similar situation as you. Make sure you're having conversations, try to keep each other positive about things. I think having gone through what was a pretty significant change in my career and seeing other folks go through that as well, it's difficult. It's hard on people. But in the end, what you find is a lot of people find their way to an opportunity they're even more excited about than where they were at previously. And so trying to keep a positive outlook, I think, is really critical, but just making sure you're checking in with yourself, you're checking in with those around you and taking care of yourself along the way, because at the end of the day, it's work. And, there are a lot more important things. We love what we do. We love to be productive people and all those wonderful things, but keeping that in context, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I think that's a great place into it. Keeping in mind that it definitely includes both aspects, the physical and the mental health. It's crazy how, so often those two go hand in hand. So I think that's a great place to wrap. So thanks again for spending some time. I'll remind folks before we turn away here that, again, if you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is just go over to our website, divvywealth.com, sign up for our blog there, or you can go over to YouTube and search at Divvi Wealth Management to subscribe to our channel. And as a reminder, most of our videos, a lot of the work that we do here is really designed to be educational in nature. We hope that folks find this type of information useful and helpful. And to that end, if you have questions or want to carry on the conversation, by all means, please reach out. There'll be a contact link in the description below. But with that, Kirby, thanks again. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Eric.
Take care.